Thank you for joining us on the Winning at Selling podcast. I'm Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems, and with me is Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast is a famous quote from legendary management consultant and writer Peter Drucker. To be clear, he didn't mean that strategy was unimportant, rather that a powerful and empowering culture was a sure route to organizational success. Please stand for the national anthem as Bill and I welcome our special guest, Indianapolis Colts Super Bowl champion Ben Utecht, to discuss culture and leadership and other important ideas on episode 500 of the Winning at Selling podcast.
All right. Well, we're excited to have Ben with us, but I don't know whether to stand, Scott, or kneel for the national anthem.
Well,
I'm not sure.
It's a game.
I'm not sure what culture is the leading culture now. So the culture is
jumping right into the hot topic there, Bill.
Yeah, well, we will. So before we get started, though, I want our listeners to know no book club this week. We're going to give our whole podcast to our guest, Ben. Next week, The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. Part 1, principles 6 through 10. I started them already. They're going to be great. So, Scott, why don't you introduce Ben?
Sure. Yeah. Really great to have Ben with us. I'm very excited that Ben has accepted our invite to be on the podcast. I heard one of his presentations and was hooked right from the first sentence. Ben Utecht played in the 2006 Super Bowl for the victorious Indianapolis Colts, led by Tony Dungy. Ben is a Fortune 500 speaker with his program, Believe in Culture. He is also an author, singer, and commits his extra time to the American Brain Foundation. He is from Hastings, a small river town in Minnesota, but his greatest accomplishment is his role as a husband to his beautiful wife and raising his 4 daughters. Ben, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.
It's great. We got a couple of questions for you, but anything that I left out in your introduction that you want to kind of share with our audience that is, something you want to celebrate, something you want to be recognized for, something that really stands out in your accomplishments?
Well, I definitely think, your last truth about me being a father of 4 daughters is probably my greatest accomplishment, because every day is a challenge. My wife and I, we call our house the estrogen ocean. And so I'm the only testosterone in the building, but I often say that I've learned more about myself as a man and a leader, being surrounded by these incredible women, and I love that quote that you said that everybody knows about culture. And in my experience, from the boardroom to the bedroom to the dinner table to the locker room, culture eats everything for every single meal.
Yeah,
that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I always say culture is not hungry, strategy prevails, but culture has quite an appetite. So one thing that I'm really interested in is Tony Dungy led the team when you won the Super Bowl. And I'm curious the impact that he had on you as a player. And as he was a coach, and I'm always interested in the impact that coaches have on their students, their players, et cetera. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think one interesting reality for corporate America to realize about professional sports, while there's a lot of crossover, there are some significant differences. One of those is that there is no HR department, right?
Yeah,
no HR department, and what that does on a positive note is it allows for unique relationships to exist between the executives, if you will, and the team members. And so what's really unique about coaching in sports is that there is a paternal relationship that's formed. And that has a powerful impact on the individual. And so not only was Coach Dungy somebody that I looked up to as a professional, but he was also someone that I looked up to as a mentor and a disciple. And that's how he approached all of his relationships with his players. Very personal, and his whole leadership style was built around servant leadership.
Mm-hmm. Just to give us some context, how old were you when you won the Super Bowl and played with Tony?
So 2006. So that would have put me right around 26 years old.
Wow.
You'd played for a lot of coaches by that time, Ben. What do you think makes a good coach? What set Tony apart to help you win that Super Bowl? and obviously you played for a lot of good coaches because you were obviously a champion as you moved through the ranks. So what do you see as the difference between someone who's really good and someone who's okay?
Man, what a actually a deep question, because you can win with a lot of different leadership styles. So I wonder if the question is really more about how do you want to win? Because I played for a number of coaches that you would say had more of an old school mentality where they would use traditional fear tactics in order to drive performance. And it would get results. I would argue that it's not sustainable, right? Because if you want to build the strongest group or the strongest family, if you listen to PJ Fleck, if you listen to Tony Dungy, everything is about family, right? The acronym for family in football is forget about me, I love you. Right. So it's a different approach to the human condition. So when I stepped into Dungy's locker room, everything was built around a belief system that proclaimed if I build better men, I get better football players. And that really is what I believe took what was the second smallest team in the NFL and made them world champions in Indianapolis. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. But I definitely think, though, to be more straightforward, for me personally, a coach who's invested in the integrity and character of the individual is the one who will obtain the greatest level of trust and commitment. And that, to me, is what makes a great coach.
Wow. That's profound. Is there one important lesson or two or three that you learned from him that you're incorporating into your everyday life?
Actions speak louder than words. Coach Dungy, I've described him often as a pillar because he is unwavering, and he doesn't change who he is in different circumstances. So I think one thing in leadership that isn't talked about enough is authenticity, and I think that's what really describes Dungy, is authentic in every situation. And that was a huge example for myself and the rest of my teammates.
Looking at our culture today, what do you see as the biggest threat to our culture?
Subjectivity, subjectivism, the movement that has really destroyed the idea that absolute truth is actually what empowers you to be the best that you can be. And so, when you enter into any type of a community where every single person can make truth what they want it to be, you create a lot of tension, you create a lot of conflict, you segregate, you create cliques and groups that end up being embattled with each other. And that is kind of the opposite of what it takes to create a unified team.
And I want to go back to something that you talked about a little bit earlier about coaching or leading through intimidation or fear versus leading through the building up of people. We have a lot of salespeople, sales coaches that listen to our podcast. And I think that because of the pressure of the numbers all the time in business, we can tend to easily fall into this trap of wanting short-term results. Get me something by the end of the month, close the deal by the end of the quarter, and otherwise you're gone. And so I think a lot of that intimidation and fear can flow through when you have a very numbers-oriented leadership style. Football is known for its numbers. What did Tony do different, or what have good leaders that you've dealt with done differently to overcome that desire for quick results and look for long-term results?
Well, that's a great question, Bill. And there's no way around the fact that you have to perform. I think that's something that we can all agree on and we can all embrace. When I share my program, The Champion's Way, I talk about one of the principles that Dungy coached with, and it was the belief that you can be bold, critical, with grace. And grace is defined as acting with kindness or clemency. And the way that he communicated with us was through the quiet strength of Tony Dungy. He would always told us he was going to speak to us as men. He was going to treat us with respect. And in my entire career with him, never once heard him use vulgarity, never once heard him yell. But what he did was he communicated very clearly what his expectations are and what the rewards and consequences are if we don't meet those expectations. Right. So he disarmed a lot of that fear, Bill, that you feel from the pressure, the natural pressure of the game, because you weren't afraid of how you were going to be ostracized or criticized, or because it was going to be done in a respectful way through him. And that really, I think, helped, as players, deal with some of those types of stresses in a unique way.
So one of the things I think people fear about a kinder or a softer approach to leadership is that they can't hold people accountable if they don't get mad and scream at them. So what do the good leaders that you've experienced do to maintain that accountability, even though they're not going to pound on their desk with a shoe?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's a part of operationalizing culture. Is creating a system, and the system takes care of the accountability. And so, like, when you look at, I use a tool from a company that I'm partnered with, a behavioral assessment, and what we've learned about managers especially is you have to have high criticality. At the same time, what's unique is to find somebody that also has high support, which is an empathy gene. And so I think the ideal leader is the one who in certain situations can understand where they need to lead with empathy. At the same time, they need to be critical. And there's a way to, it's something that has to be more developed in leaders, but there's no way around the fact that in order to hold people accountable, you have to have the ability to be critical and to hold people accountable for their actions and performances.
Well, it sounds like you're getting into the essence of motivation and the difference between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. In your role as a professional football player, what are some of the motivations that your teammates have had, or what have you found to be really effective when everybody's working together to achieve a common goal?
Money.
You're talking to the right audience here.
No, I mean, one of my mentors, in business taught me that right away. It's always, only, and never about one thing until it's not, and that's money. And when you go from college, well, I guess not anymore that college players can make money, but when you enter the NFL, it really does become a business. And so, the most effective way to control a player's behavior is to control their ability to make money. And so that's one, and it can be done in a healthy way, or it can be done in a toxic way, but that's one. And then, like you just talked about, motivation, inspiration. How are you making an emotional connection with the player, so that, as we talked about, they go deeper into trust and commitment, right? Because the psychology of commitment tells us that it's called a culture of reciprocity. It's like when players are receiving information that makes them feel valued and makes them feel like they have a purpose, then they want to give you more. And so if we can create that type of a culture, you're going to have a team that's going to go out and give you everything they have every day. Yeah,
makes a lot of sense.
When you get into the rare air of kind of the haves and have-nots on a football team, right? I think your quarterback was Peyton Manning.
Yes.
And obviously he was making a good living, whether he did well or not. How do you motivate the high earners as opposed to those players that are making more of the base and can be manipulated by the money a little bit more? And the reason I ask that is because we run into the same thing with salespeople. We have those unique set of 10%, maybe 2% salespeople that are always beating their goals and make the big money and could do even better if we could find ways to motivate them. And then we have kind of the rest of the also rans.
Yeah. So, and you'll have to educate me on this from the sales industry lens when I give you the answer about Peyton. When you look at the Peytons, when you look at the Tom Brady's, when you look at the top 1 or 2% of performers in the NFL, these are behavioral profiles that don't need anything else. They're so driven that even being in the lead is, as a leader, as a captain, is what motivates them enough to go out there. So, at the same time, you have Peyton and his contracts and the things that drive him. But everything I knew and everything I experienced about playing alongside of one of the greatest quarterbacks in history was that no one ever needed to push Peyton. It was relentless. It never stopped. I mean, he was there for every off-season workout. He never left Indianapolis. This is a guy that had, like you talked about, Bill, that 1 to 2%. And so ultimately, I think it was winning a Super Bowl, right? That was kind of the thing, for Peyton, was the only way he's going to have the legacy that he wants is to achieve, the 2 greatest victories, which is a Super Bowl championship and a Hall of Fame induction. And that ultimately is what drove him. So maybe part of that answer is, how do you keep finding new rewards that could take those top salespeople to another level?
Right. Because it sounds like what you're saying is it's not the money that motivates them. The money becomes a reward for their own self-motivation. The money becomes a reflection then of their desire to be champions all the time.
Yeah.
And then find something like winning the Super Bowl or being the best at that they can continue to achieve to. Don't let them fall back on their laurels. Always find something new that they can do.
Yes. And that's, and honestly, like the NFL, scouting department, on teams that are winning multiple Super Bowls, they do this really well. They understand the personality profiles and the behavioral profiles they need in order to get those types of players.
Mm-hmm.
The players that you call franchise players, you can build a franchise around. And that's true in business too. My E3 tool through Behavioral Essentials is a tool that can benchmark the top performing salespeople. And you always find the common thread, which is they're over 75% aggression. They're under 25% self-control. They're creative. They're high criticality. They're high proactive. I mean, there's a very specific profile in the top 1 or 2% of sales that you're talking about. And if you can create that data stream, then you can hire into that stream and build your team around those types of profiles.
Yeah. Fascinating. Right now in our marketplace, Ben, there's a lot of people that are returning to work. And it seems like there's some folks that are really resisting that. And then there are some people that are welcoming that. And it seems to be that if people are missing a connection at work, they want to return to work because that's part of the culture. If they didn't feel like they ever had a connection at work, they want to stay home and work from home and not return to work. And it seems like a lot of this is driven by culture. So how can companies that are bringing workers back to work create or having an inspired culture where people want to gather again and be part of a community? Any advice on that?
That's that's tough, right? Because you want to be sensitive to the emotional needs of people. I mean, it's really important. At the same time, especially when you're talking to somebody that spent his whole life in teams and in organizations that didn't really operate. They operated more as a private company, right? So
mm-hmm.
What the leaders decide is what you have to do. And so when you get into these larger companies, what's happening in those cultures is that they, in some ways are just succumbing to the subjectivism of the employee base. And they have to make a decision in that moment. What type of a company are we going to be? And what are we going to believe in? And how are we going to promote that? And that's really company to company. So I do a lot of work in downtown St. Paul, and I've been waiting for 12 months for return to work strategies to come out. But it's just not happening. And these are massive companies, security,
right.
And so something it's just a new world that we have to operate in.
Right. Yeah. And you can't work from home in the NFL, right?
Yeah, well, no, and you know what? The next 5 years is going to tell us whether, what type of, psychological effect this.
Oh, definitely.
I personally, my personal opinion is,
yeah, please.
We need to be together.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need to be together in a culture that, pours into people and gets them excited to come to work every day.
Yeah, sometimes as we are a little bit older, Scott and I are a little longer in the tooth, and we, sometimes we look at that and we say, is it just our old thinking that, we feel people need to be together, or is that truly what creates a culture where people can grow and get better? I have 3 sons who are all in business. All of them haven't been back to the office for 2 years. Other than very sporadically. And I very much worry about them not being known for who they are, not being known as much for their capabilities, not having the eye of the people who are in leadership to say, these are some of the people that we want to continue to promote, rather than being somebody who is a non-entity who happens to get their work done.
You're so right. And I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but I know that there is deep behavioral psychology on the relational needs of human beings. It's a part of who we are as people. And so there's got to be some truth in there. There's got to be a balance to that. Obviously we've learned that people can do great work from home, and that life goes on, and that companies can still be successful, and sometimes more successful because, they're getting out of, commercial real estate leases that were costing them a ton of money, and now they don't have that overhead anymore. So there's so many things to consider, which is why I started by saying, we got to be sensitive to those and think critically around it. But I just have felt so and experienced so much fruit that has come out of being with the people that I work with, and it's just made me feel more valued in my own personal life.
So Ben, one of the things that I've noticed in leadership is that we tend to find a role model somewhere along the line. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a coach, a teacher, and we find that person's style is effective toward us, and therefore then that's how we start to lead people. Unfortunately, it's often not duplicatable. It's seldom really a good leadership style. What can we do if we've ended up being influenced over the years by someone who is a so-so leader, and now I'm managing people and it's not really working?
That's really good. It reminds me of, John Maxwell's Leadership 2.0, where he talks about the 5 Ps, and the top is pinnacle. And it's when a leader, enters into a space where because of his productivity, because of his or her communication skills and relational skills, they have kind of gotten to this level where people just want to follow them. They want to trust them. And then you kind of, then Maxwell talks about how important it is for those leaders to create successors. Right. It's the, it's the whole Jedi model, right?
Well, it's the NFL model when you look at coaching trees, right? You look at coaching trees as a big deal in your industry. So,
yeah. And you look at, and the greats do that. You look at the few backup quarterbacks that we had in Indianapolis, and Peyton did a great job of working with them as well. And that's what you want to see out of your leaders, because ultimately that, culture is the leader's choice. And so you want to, when you find those top leaders, you want to have some type of a system or development program that allows them to do their best to mentor and replicate what they've done, down the line, so that can continue to live on. And ultimately, you see it in the NFL when teams go through changes and they lose coaches and they lose leaders. Oftentimes that team goes into a drought until they can rebuild and find those, those unique, people again.
So Ben, one of the things that you like to do is sing. What's the name of your band?
Well, I started out, believe it or not, I had a record deal out of Nashville when I was my first play in the NFL was not as a football player. I got asked to sing the anthem at the Buffalo Bills game my rookie year. And so the Indianapolis RCA Dome experienced me first as a singer and not a tight end. So that was interesting. But solo career. A couple of years ago, just before COVID, I started an international group called Reborn with a Grammy-nominated tenor from Canada and a multi-platinum selling baritone from South Africa. Really cool group.
Wow.
And then COVID hit and kind of destroyed all that. So
yeah.
So,
Yeah,
but
you're not alone.
One door closes, another opens. In the last 12 months, I've become basically a chief culture officer for a couple of great companies, and so I'm really excited to be in this lane and to give everything I have over to helping companies create chosen culture.
So let's explore that a little bit, because we've talked about leadership a lot, but we haven't really explored this culture idea. Companies have a culture, whether they acknowledge it or not. Sometimes it's got some good factors to it, or they wouldn't have been successful at all.
Yeah.
But over time, that culture doesn't always work as well. We've had a big change with COVID, as we've been talking about. How can a company look at what their culture is, assess that culture then, and how do they make the changes in something that's so ingrained?
It's really good. And you said something that I often say too. I say it a little differently, that you'll have a culture by design or default. You're so right, Bill. Like, you can't do anything about that. That's just true. And so if that's true, why not design it? And that, to me, is the essence that a lot of organizations miss out on in the kind of paradoxical world of culture. Everybody talks about it, everybody wants it, but nobody can figure out how to actually, programatize it. And that's really what I experienced in Indianapolis, right? So what Dungy did is, we had these pillars of belief, and I say belief because I believe that you can't value something unless you believe in something first. And so most companies mission, vision, value, and they sit around a table talking about what they believe in order to write those statements. And you miss all this meat, which is the what, why, and how of what you believe. And so when in Indianapolis, we had pillars like accountability, right, or vulnerability, but it wasn't just a belief that was written out as a value statement. It was, what do we believe about vulnerability? Why do we believe it? And then how do we practice it? And that's the key. This is one of the major differences between professional football and business, is that we practice 95% of the time in order to perform 5% of the time.
Right.
But business is flipped. Right. And so
if you're lucky.
Yeah, exactly. And so how do you make culture objective and actually create like an operational system that you can practice every single day at work while you're working? And these are the questions we need to ask, because you just have to stretch yourself a bit and go into discussing and strategizing around how we can create programs in order to practice and develop people as their work.
So the first step is kind of figuring out what your culture is, what you've ended up with, usually by default, as you say.
Yeah.
And then start to make decisions. What do we want it to be? And those are those pillars. Yes. And then how do we get there means we have to change our behavior on a daily basis to move in that direction.
Yep. And you can never let up. I mean, that's the thing about culture, is you have to keep your finger on it every day. You're not just going to write something, put it on your website, send it in an email to all your employees and say, hey, just want you to read this, and we're just going to trust you're going to live it out. It's going a step further. And that's why we've seen these companies, everybody from Google to Netflix, to small and mid-sized companies, start to hire this chief culture officer, because you really want to find that person that's their job, is they dedicate themselves to creating an objective culture that can be practiced if you're doing it well. And that, believe it or not, came out of an NFL locker room for me.
Right. Well, it's interesting because we had a person who looked like a perennial failure, Matthew Stafford, who played for Detroit for 12 years, changed teams. And I was never impressed with Stafford. I thought he was okay, but I was really impressed with what happened when he changed cultures. and was able to win a Super Bowl. What do you think happened there? I don't want to degrade Detroit, but that's one of the teams we see all the time, and they haven't seemed to have been able to get out of that doldrums of a failure culture for 20 years.
Well, I think when you look at the Rams coaching staff and the type of operation that they ran,
what they used to have as a coaching staff, because the Vikings are stealing half of them.
Exactly. Which will be really interesting to see what happens with the Kirk Cousins in this type of a culture.
That's right.
Right. Yeah.
And so, but you look at that team, and they had some very veteran leaders. One of those was a dear friend, Andrew Whitworth. And Andrew was one of the longest playing left tackles in the game. And I know just personally, he's probably one of the, strongest integrity character leaders that I was ever around in football. And when you put those types of people on a team and you mix them with coaches that are taking that approach to the human condition, that's the leadership that has the waterfall effect of high performing culture that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. So were you surprised at all at what Stafford did?
No, I mean, I think for the last couple of seasons he's been doing that pretty consistently. It was just a matter of all of their hard work and all of their talent coming together at the right time. I was more shocked at the Cincinnati Bengals, because that was the team that I went to after my career in Indianapolis, and so I went from a world championship culture to a culture that hadn't won a playoff game in over 21 years at that time. And so, I think a great case study would be to see, okay, what did Joe Burrows do? I mean, Joe Burrows came onto that team and the whole thing has changed.
And this was his rookie year, right?
Exactly. So what happened in that locker room? And I heard one person recently just describe, it's such a young team and they're so adaptable. And so you've got a leader like Joe Burrows who comes in and can immediately have an impact, because he's not dealing with a lot of veteran egos. I mean, he's working with young players that are looking up to him and are just following. And it's ultimately, I mean, for them to go 30 plus years without winning a playoff game and then to head into a championship, that's a big deal.
Right.
I know one thing that's important to you is the American Brain Foundation, and contributing a lot of time to that. But what is that group and what do you do, and how can people support them?
So the American Brain Foundation is the public-facing board of the American Academy of Neurology, which is probably the most prestigious neurology group in the world, and they happen to be in Minneapolis.
Wow.
And so, as you know, healthcare is one of the things that this state is known for, and neurology is, part of that epicenter. And so, with my career ending due to concussion and just really caring about athlete brain health, I kind of joined the Academy of Neurology as their concussion spokesperson, and then moved over to their board. And their whole goal, their whole passion in life is to cure brain disease and to help individuals and families that are devastated by Alzheimer's, dementia, you name it. So it's a great organization. They're right here in the great state of Minnesota, and they're doing a lot of really incredible work.
Yeah, I think we all know somebody that has dementia or Alzheimer's, so it becomes very personal.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Ben, thanks for being on the show with us today. If you want to contact Ben, we're going to put his contact information, his website, Ben Utecht Speaks, on our page at winningatselling.com. So thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm accessible. So reach out on LinkedIn. I'd love to communicate with you guys, and I appreciate your time.
All right, great. Thanks. This segment is brought to you by The Art of Prospecting, Your Guide to Get in the Door by Steve Kloida.
I'm Ron Lehman, and I want to tell you about one of the best sales books I've ever read. The Art of Prospecting, Your Guide to Get in the Door, gives you the tools and techniques to fill your pipeline and achieve more sales success. The author is Steve Kloida, known as the prospecting expert, and this book proves it. So if you want to learn from the master, get The Art of Prospecting, Your Guide to Get in the Door. It's available at theprospectingexpert.com. Just click on the Buy Book button.
All right, our last thing to wrap up. Ben, I'll ask you this. Any favorite quotes that you have that come to mind real quick. Otherwise, I'll stick one of my own in.
Any famous favorite quotes?
I didn't give Ben any warning, so he's
no. That's all right. I love the one about culture is defined or by default, and that's what I wrote down when I first heard you speak, Ben, and that carried me forward with all of my clients, and I shared that with them. Another quote that I think relates to culture is defined by what leadership is willing to tolerate, and I think a lot of CEOs need to recognize that. But one quote I'll leave you with: we have a very unique Super Bowl ring. It's the only ring in the history of football to have a belief system engraved in the side of the ring, and it's the words faith. It had nothing to do with religion. It had everything to do with Dungy's passion to bring 53 men together in a very unique way. So the acronym for faith on the Indianapolis Colts was freedom for all individuals to trust and hope in each other. And that's something universal that if we can accomplish in business and in life, we're going to achieve pretty amazing things in the right way.
Excellent.
Wow,
all right. Wow. We're going to leave it there. Scott, our contact information.
Yes. Go to winningatselling.com for the show notes and how to subscribe to future episodes.
And next week, our topic is sales strategy. And we'll be back to our book club, The Success Principles by Jack Canfield, Part 1, Principles 6 through 10. Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.